Welcome back to another Stampede Blue Colts cast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Matt Danley. Thank you guys for joining me once again. Tonight we are doing nothing but listener call-in. So I'm going to do my very best to kind of keep as much of the ringers noise to a minimum, if at all possible, and try to get these all in. And look, I don't even care what we talk about. We've got like no real new news coming out. The only thing of substance is that the Colts are starting their second little session of OTAs tomorrow. And who knows what we're going to see in that, who's going to actually, have anything of newsworthiness out there. So, this is what we're kind of working with. It's going to be kind of interesting. I'm anxious to kind of see who some of the guys are that are popping up and who actually draws some interest from the guys that are there keeping track of everything. So other than that, there really isn't much going on. The constant topic of Andrew Luck is out there. I mean, we've seen him look like, when he was just out of surgery, more or less, and in his sling, he kind of looks like an old, I don't know, a hobo, all skinny and almost looks like he doesn't have any teeth with his facial expression. And then you see him at the 500 the other day and you see how, stacked he is. And it seems like the national media is kind of coming around to understanding what we've been talking about for as long as I can remember. And so I'm interested to see how he is not going to be doing anything, folks, until probably mini camp. But with that said, we still have the interesting possibility of, does he actually have anything that comes up with him involved of newsworthiness? I mean, and that's about it. There just isn't anything that he's going to be doing physically that is going to suffice the national media until minicamp. At minimum, I think I think that we probably don't see much of him until training camp either. So, as far as Andrew Luck goes, that's just about it. There just really isn't anything else to talk about now. We can get into free agency. We can get into just about whatever you guys want to get into. I'm good with any of it and all of it. Whatever you guys want to talk about, ring us up, 574-626-8689. Let's get these phone calls started. Let's get in here and talk some Colts football, because more than likely, we're going to have a better conversation than we could possibly talk about any news or anything else that's coming up Colts related. Just isn't going. There just isn't anything going on right now. We are so close to the dead period where nothing of note whatsoever is going to come up for probably the better part of a couple months. As soon as OTAs is over, we don't hear anything until minicamp, and then after minicamp, nothing until training camp. So let's get these calls in and let's get started here, guys, because we've got whatever you want to talk about, whether it be the Colts draft class, whether it be the free agency, who's left on the market. We can talk about Luck if you guys want to. Just anything that you guys want to talk about, let's get it on and let's get to talking about it, because there's probably a little bit of some interest out there anyhow, in terms of what this draft class is actually going to produce. There's also some talk about, some of the free agency guys, but some of the guys that are there that on this roster, what they can actually do, because the wide receiver class is very low in terms of there's not a lot of they don't have any time in. I mean, they're just not a group with a ton of experience. And that's just something that, Colts fans are going to have a hard time digging into and getting in tune with. So, I mean, looking at the edge class, the edge group, there's a few guys there, but there's some interesting things to be said about them. I mean, with Jabal Sheard, John Simon, what a lot of us kind of thought that John Simon was going to be the guy that was going to be let go as opposed to Jonathan Hankins, right? I think some other people thought that too. I think that some other people probably were more in line with that Hankins probably, even Al Woods isn't a great scheme fit. But we've got guys on this roster now, I mean, Kamiko Toure, he's an interesting prospect coming in. You know, we've got guys like, Jabal, like I said, Jabal Sheard, John Simon, and we've got Terrell Basham. Now, does that create some sort of a bottleneck there at the position, at edge, at defensive end? I don't know, but I'm interested to see it because I'm almost trying to think that maybe, or not trying to think, but I'm almost convinced that Terrell Basham might have his work cut out for him, not necessarily maybe making the roster, but I think that there's going to be a lot of conversation about, does he actually fit in? He's going into a system where he is set. This is his kind of scheme. This 4-3 Tampa 2, whatever you want to call it. This is his kind of bread and butter. This is where he needs to shine. But does a guy like Kamiko Toure step in and actually really get this thing going? If not, what does that do to Terrell? Or if he does, what does that do to Terrell Basham? Does that leave Terrell Basham as the number 4? Does that leave him out, or does Kamiko Toure kind of fall in line to more of what we saw last year out of Barkevius Mingo? I don't really know, but I'm interested to talk about it. You guys want to talk about this edge clock? Come on, let's go. Let's get these calls started. 574-626-8689. Let me make sure that phone number is right. That's right. So get in here and call, guys, because we got some talking to do. And you guys are the ones that are going to be running the show here. Let's get it on. Let's figure out what we got coming on, because you guys, like I said, you guys are the ones that are running the show tonight. We're doing an entire hour of listener call-ins. So if you guys want to call in, now's the time to do it. Otherwise, we don't really have a script for the show. This is all about you guys. This is why I did this tonight. I hope that you guys all had a good Memorial Day weekend. I hope that if you guys went to the race, that you guys were all safe and that you guys had a blast. There just was nothing over the weekend that came out, obviously. There just isn't going to be, either. There's a very little news with the Colts. I mean, they did sign another cornerback. They got rid of Sereno, but that was about it. There just isn't a lot going out right now. Their next 3-day session of OTAs is up tomorrow starting. And, like I said, what are we going to hear from that? Are we going to hear much of anything? Probably not. But it's going to be this dead period here for the better part of the next probably 50 to 60 days. And I don't expect us to hear much from OTAs in the next session either. I think these next couple weeks, until we get into actually minicamp and they can start putting guys in position to where they want them, then I don't know that we're going to see much. I don't know that we're going to hear much. It's just a bad, it's a bad time for news. It's a bad situation for the Colts because they come into this season. They have to be the team that takes over. They have to be the team that actually becomes, the underdog story for the rest of the NFL. Because if they don't, what are they? They've proven everybody wrong. Or they've proven everybody right. And that ultimately isn't what everybody wants. We desperately need, Andrew Luck to come back. We need some of these receivers to really kind of improve their game to make sure that there actually is some interest there for these guys. These guys have to be able to step up to the plate. Andrew Luck's got to be able to step up to the plate, and I think that he's going to. I am interested. I did a show a little bit earlier tonight with Coach Les, and he was kind of wanting to know about Andrew Luck, but there really isn't much to tell, kind of like I talked about earlier. There really isn't. The only thing that we're seeing with Andrew Luck is that he's stacked, and we can pretty much guess that he's ready to go. He looks bigger than he's been in throughout, his entire career. I don't think any of us have ever seen him look like that. I don't think that any of us expected to see him look the way he does right now. So I mean, if you guys have any questions about him, then we've probably gone through them already about 500 times. There is not much to talk about with him, but there is with, like I said, with some of these other positions. We've got several positions that are going to have some nice camp battles. I'm still a little concerned about the cornerback position. I think that when you look at some of the no names, I guess you could say, that are still on here, Lashard Durr, Robert Jackson. We don't know anything about these guys. They signed, what as I said, Channing Stribling earlier today, and they waived injured Sereno. So what does he actually bring to the table? I mean, he's got good size. He's 6'1", 181, or 6'1", 188. He's out of Michigan. He's a second-year guy, basically. We don't know. None of these guys. I mean, we've got the core guys, Quincy Wilson. We've got Pierre, Desir, and we've got Nate Hairston. Outside of that, we don't have a lot to talk about. We don't have a lot of guys that are really going to step up and be, the man. I just don't see how that could be super enticing to just about anybody. This cornerback group, I think that they can play. I think that they're solid. But I also think that when we look at what we expect to receive from the national media or anything like that, we're not going to get a lot. We're not going to get a lot of credit for any of that. I mean, who's standing out in this group? That might be the biggest storyline that could possibly eventually come out of minicamp. I mean, let's go through the names again. Lashard Durr, Robert Jackson, Milton. I think we know what to expect from Milton. Kenny Moore. A lot of people like Kenny Moore. I know that the Colts like Kenny Moore. We know that Ballard likes Kenny Moore. But Stribling, Andre Tolliver, DJ White, I think that he's a guy that Ballard is high on. Otherwise, I don't think that he would be here. But the Colts never did sign Bashaud Breeland. It kind of baffles me that they've, kind of not bitten on the Michael Kendricks possibilities. I'm just really interested to see why not, more or less. I know that he doesn't want to get a lot of big-time guys that, may be big names, who may also be one of those guys that is closing in on 30. But I just don't see him as a guy who's closing in on 30. I don't see either one of those guys. Both of those guys were very competitive, very good ball players at their position last year. And look, the Colts need talent. I mean, Breeland is fairly young still. He would fit right in with this. And like I said the other day, several people are asking, well, where would he fit in? Who does he start over? Who cares? This is the Colts. There's talent out there. The Colts have to be able to bring in some of that talent, and they're not right now. I'm wondering why. I really am truly wondering why. Is it to kind of knock the price down a little bit? I mean, they've got some safeties out there that they could get. They had some come in for visits, and I'm a little shocked that the Colts haven't, taken the bait on any of those guys. I'm a little surprised that they're just waiting for any of this to kind of to pop off. There's plenty of talent out there, and the Colts have a lack of talent overall. I mean, let's look. Like I said, not just there, but Danico Autry, nobody's heard anything about him lately, nor do we expect to. It's OTAs. I mean, what do we expect to hear about him? That he's fast in shorts. I mean, the only thing they're wearing is helmets. There's no contact or very limited contact. They're not doing any real, collisions or anything like that other than by accident. That's the only thing that they can do. But, I mean, Marcus Hunt, does he fit in here? Because when he was in Cincinnati, he was a guy who was basically seen to be fit in their scheme. Now he comes out of that and goes into the Colts 3-4 and plays really well last year for the Colts. This year, he comes back into a similar scheme that he was into in Cincinnati. I don't know what we should expect from that. I think that the Colts have a lot of roster moves to go on, and I know that a lot of people are saying, don't base what's going on right now with your team this early. Well, that's fine, and that's great and all. But the talent level out in the free agency market is dwindling, and the Colts aren't biting on those who are actually available. This isn't like some sort of an indictment, I guess you could say, a negative indictment on Chris Ballard not going after it. I'm just more than anything very curious to find out why, what he's looking for, what he feels needs to happen in order to pull some of these guys out of the free agency market. It's it's pretty enticing to me. I could not be more excited to see how this roster changes over the next couple months. I think it's going to be completely changed in a couple different positions because we're going to see injuries. We're going to see some guys, fall off. I think a lot of these undrafted guys are going to fall off. I think there might be a couple that stand out and a couple that actually, do something that entice this group. I think that Ballard is waiting to be taken, by the hand, so to speak, or taken and kind of wowed by somebody. I think that Frank Reich is as well. But I'm just waiting to see who are these guys that are going to actually stand out when they're in full pads and they're ready to go after it. Let's look at a couple other guys here. There's Chris McCain. This is one guy that really interests me, and I can't wait to see what people have to say about him down there. I can't wait to see him in training camp for myself. I'm very excited for that. But there's a long time between now and then. He's a speed rusher. He's undersized. He's a guy who's going to be in there straight up to attack the quarterback. That's it. That's the only reason he's going to be in the game. Who else is going to be doing that, right? Are they really going to send Tyquan Lewis inside all the time? Or are they going to actually try to use him as an edge rusher? We prefer to think that he's going to be kicked inside quite a bit because he's got that speed and that burst to where he can get in between the interior offensive linemen and create some havoc up the interior. I think that's his role. I think that's his role in this defense, especially with what they've got currently at the defensive end position. So, like I said, Hunt, we don't know what he's going to produce. He did a nice job last year of creating some interior, pressure. And I think that maybe he could succeed in this one. Maybe it's a slightly different scheme from what they ran in Cincinnati. And because it is so based on just attack, it almost makes me feel like that and it's weird too, because I'm trying to tread lightly with how I convey this, but there are so many Colts players that are on the defensive side of the ball that are talking about this scheme. They're like, there's no thinking about it really. We know it's go, attack, full go, and there's just a lot less to remember. And that, I think that's a good thing, but I also don't know really what the ceiling is for a scheme like this with that in mind. I mean, the biggest problem from the past with Pagano was that we didn't feel like he could scheme against other offenses, right? We didn't feel like he was a good play caller. We didn't feel like even when, he had a couple solid defensive coordinators in through his tenure. And I think that Pagano probably tried to pull too many times the trump card, so to speak, on what those defensive coordinators were calling, their play calling. There just wasn't enough good scheme. There wasn't enough good preparation. This seems like it's going to be a scheme where there is a severe lack of not preparation in what their game plan week to week is, but what are these guys actually learning if they don't have to think? You look, when you want a guy to play hard, you don't want him thinking necessarily too hard. You want him to know that he's got a couple responsibilities. You want to know that the guy that's supposed to pierce the interior is doing that. A guy who's rushing the edge, a guy who's, staying with their keys and so on and so forth from the linebacker position. But that is going to be, like I said, I just kind of wonder what the ceiling is for a defense like this. I truly do, because I feel like there's a little bit going to be left out. And I feel like some of this isn't necessarily going to be a good thing. I worry about it a little bit. So, guys, again, if you want to call in, the phone number is 574-626-8689. Make sure you guys are calling in and being a part of the show. I mean, if you're watching, which some of you are, give us a call. You got something you want to talk about? Let's have the conversation. This is supposed to be an entire hour dedicated to you guys, the listeners, so that we can talk. We're 20 minutes into the show, and we don't have a call yet. So Let's chat it up. Pick up your phone. Let's talk. I mean, you guys have questions. You guys have ideas about what you guys are seeing with this group, what this roster is actually capable of. I mean, you have questions about the draft class, so let's hear them. Let's talk about it. But I'm going to continue on. I'm going to keep talking about the guys that I'm seeing here with basically what what we can and can't expect from this group. I mean, Anthony Johnson, he's been on the roster for a little while. We're not for sure what he's going to do. We've talked about, Rakeem Nunes-Roches in the past. We're not sure what he offers. So he and Danico Autry, two guys that were brought in free agency that I kind of wonder if either or possibly both might actually be on the bubble. I'm not going to pretend that I remember what their contracts were, because I don't. But those guys with all this young talent, I mean, there's a ton of defensive ends. There's a ton of there's a good group of defensive tackles, but really only two starters. So do they end up kicking, Hunt down low? Do they end up kicking Tyquan Lewis down low? And do they get more out of those guys than they do maybe with Autry or Nunes-Roches? I don't know. I don't think that they do in front of Autry. I think Autry is actually a very good technician on the defensive line. The guy has, there's been once the Colts signed him, there was a few videos that came out and that people were putting together. I thought that those were really well produced, and you could see how much of a technician this guy was with his hands. So I think Autry is probably safe. But Nunes-Roches, we don't know anything about this guy, and I'm a little curious as to see what we actually get out of him. I'm really interested to see what we see from Kamiko Toure. I think that he's probably, at least for the time being, I think that he is more than likely a guy who fits into how they used Barkevious Mingo last year. Now, I don't mean in the scheme, but I do mean as far as snaps and how often that they, use him really to rush the passer. Do they use him in coverage? I tend to think probably not very often, but at the same time, I wonder about Kamiko Toure possibly playing in one of those outside linebacking positions. I don't think that he's made for a will, but I think that if Antonio Morrison doesn't blow the coaching staff's doors off from the Sam position, that Toure could actually possibly fill in there. He was an outside linebacker at Rutgers. That was different scheme, granted, but he had some good coverage. He dropped into his zones pretty quickly. He was a capable coverage guy, and that has me interested. Do they just continue to use him wherever they have a hole, basically? And I think that he may be the ultimate defensive utility guy for this Colts defense. I think that he's a guy that they're going to have a hard time game planning for, because they're going to use him so readily just about wherever they could possibly need somebody. I think, and we've talked about this earlier, in the month. I think that really Grover Stewart and Hassan Ridgeway really have a lot to prove. Grover Stewart, obviously, because he's a second-year guy, but I think that Ridgeway, took such a small incremental jump from the year previous. He's a Grigson guy, so to speak. So I don't really know, how much they're putting into him. I don't know how much they're actually wanting to, how much leeway is he actually going to get? That's what really has me extremely curious for right now. I don't know if he gets the extended rope, I suppose, because there's going to be a few guys out there, and there may be, he may be just either too slow. He may not be a guy that fits well. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. There hasn't been a lot of talk about him in the past couple weeks, past month or so. It's been around a lot of other guys, a lot of the new guys, a lot of the guys that have come in. And I don't think that Hassan Ridgeway is really going to be a key guy in this defense. I think he's got to make himself a key guy. I think he has to make himself one of the most premier guys of this group. He has to come in and basically, kick everybody's ass. I think in minicamp and in training camp, if he wants to be taken seriously by Ballard in this group. But Karan Reed, another defensive guy along the defensive line. This might be, as far as the strict defensive tackle group outside of Al Woods, there's a lot to be proven with that group, and I'm pretty anxious to see what exactly comes of that. Offensive line wise, I'm curious to see what Deshaun Bond can do, because the Colts were so high on him last year. He is a guy who played really well as an undrafted free agent. I think that, any guy who comes in and starts and actually pulls it out is pretty impressive to begin with. But they've got some other guys in there, and they've got some young guys that they not only did they draft, but they brought in Slauson. And at least in the first session of OTA, Slauson was slotted in, I believe, at right guard, and they had Austin Howard in a right tackle. So I think that while Mewhort is out for whatever reason and for however long, that Slauson might be kind of the de facto starter at right guard. That's my assumption and presumption. I just think that I think that Mewhort's probably the better option, to be perfectly honest with you guys. He's younger, he's better, I think, than probably most of the right guards that they've got on the roster. I just have a hard time. I have a really hard time seeing. Man, I have a really hard time seeing Slauson starting at right guard over either Mewhort or even Smith, for that matter. Smith is a guy who is uber athletic. They really like his speed and his toughness, but he can get out and create some running lanes for the running backs as well, outside of the pocket, outside of the package. I just think that he and Nelson are two guys that they really want to see out and about. They want to see them opening up, those extra 10, 15 yards. And like we talked about, again, earlier in the month, we talked about those guys opening up that second and third level yardage production from the for the running backs. Marlon Mack with that speed, Nyheim Hines with that speed, and just about anybody else in that Colts backfield could really, really use another athletic guard to get out and make a block. I mean, I remember very vividly Vunovich last year getting out on the side. He pulled to the right. I believe it was against the Cardinals, and he got out. There was one guy to block. He went towards a completely different player. I think it was a linebacker coming from the inside. There was one guy that could make the tackle, and he completely whiffed. The Colts can't have that, not in this running scheme. This is going to be a completely different scheme than you guys have seen, I think, for the Colts in the Colts offense. I mean, obviously, Luck is going to be able to take some pressure off of the running game. The running game is going to take some pressure off of Luck. But in the end, that offensive line is going to be so key. And there's been some smart comments, talking about that the Colts offensive line's terrible. At the moment, yeah, we can't, even though it's Quentin Nelson at left guard and, whoever at right guard and, kind of a journeyman in Howard at right tackle, there really isn't a lot of credit that you can give this Colts offensive line. I get it. But to dispute that they were vastly improved throughout the offseason, the draft, free agency, is silly to me. There's no way that you can look at this group and not see improvement. And nationally, they're not getting it. I mean, aside from everybody kind of hopping and swinging from Nelson's, I think that they're forgetting about Jack Mewhort and how good he can play as a healthy right guard. I think they're vastly underrating Ryan Kelly and how good he is at center and how good he played as a rookie. I'm not sure about how quality Howard is. I've watched some of his film, and he's okay. He's all right. He's better than what the Colts have had there, I believe. But there's a nice competition there with Denzel Good, with maybe LaRaven Clark, depending on who they have on the left side of the line. They've got some interesting guys that are going to come in and really try to battle for this. And I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see, and whatever I don't see, I can't wait to hear about it, because this offensive line is a group that I think finally we're seeing the steps towards being a quality offensive line. Now, protection wise, I think is a different story. I think that protection wise, Howard's not great. He's okay. He's not great. I think that Costanzo is really good. I think that he gets a bad beating for just, those few plays a game that he gets beaten by one of the better edge rushers. I don't know that that's fair for him. But I do, on the other hand, think that there is some guys who definitely need to be, given a little bit more credit than what they are given. So we finally do have a caller here. So thank you for calling the Colts Cast. What's happening?
How's it going, man?
I'm good, brother. What are you doing?
I actually just turned on the stream, and I heard you talking about some of the O-line guys, and I wanted to pick your brain on what you think about Deshaun Bond. I know he got hurt. When was it? Early last season, I think. He was filling in for Ryan Kelly, and I feel like a lot of people, as of right now, are just kind of cutting him off the roster in their early predictions. And I personally feel like he plugged in pretty well and could probably fill either a backup spot for the center, or maybe even a fight for a guard position really quick. And I haven't heard really anybody talk about him, so I just kind of want to pick the brain.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about him? I mean, like you said, yeah, I think he filled in really nicely last year at center. But I think that they also are giving him credit for being a really quality interior lineman, right?
Yeah.
At least for what he is. I mean, he is an undrafted free agent, but man, he was tough as nails last year, and he really worked his butt off. But see, we're dealing with this ring. Man, tried to get that ring out of there, guys. Sorry, but unfortunately, in order enable for me to hear you, I can't right now, so I can't turn down the input on this without cutting them out. So if you're calling, just wait until this conversation is over real quick and then call back. I'm never going to get anything worth this without a ring in it. I can't turn my phone off, even the ringer's off and everything else, and I still can't keep the ringer from coming through into the sound. So, but Bond is a guy who I think obviously Ballard loves, right? I think that Ballard likes him a lot. I think that Ballard sees, how tough he played last year. I mean, he stepped in to a center role that was given to a guy who was picked in the first round the year previous.
Yeah.
I mean, that is difficult to do. I mean, you're basically getting no credit whatsoever when it comes to something like that. I think that Bond has, he's not a huge guy. Okay. I mean, he's 6'1", 300. I mean, weight wise is not what I'm getting at, but he's 6'1", but he is an interior guy. But even if you look at some of these interior guys for the Colts, they're 6'3", 6'4". He really was an undersized guy. And not only was he a guy who played really well last year, but he was a guy who was getting picked on because he and Vunovich were those two interior pieces on that side of the line. And I thought that, I just thought that he really held his own. I don't know where I'll be honest with you, with the improvement in the offensive line this year. I think that he could make it, but I'm really questioning kind of what the reality of him making the 53-man roster this year. I think he is a absolute shoe-in for a practice squad guy. I mean, honestly, without question, I think he's a practice squad guy, hands down. But I really wonder if he's a guy who can kind of make it on this roster, because they've got an entire starting lineup across the line right now. And like we were just talking about, they've got guys who can back up possibly. I mean, if LaRaven Clark doesn't get cut, is he the left tackle, the second guy over there? I mean, who's the guy at left guard, the second guy? I think Slauson kind of works as an interior lineman there too. And then you have to fight that with Ballard and Reich's love for the youth, on the team. Is Slauson a guy who they're going to keep, and then take snaps away from some of these young guys who they feel like they can develop as interior depth, if not a starter for the future. I mean, so it's really a hard question to answer, to be quite honest with you. Aside from the fact of what we saw and how he stepped up to the plate last year, when like I said, he stepped into a first round pick's shoes at center last year and really held his own.
Yeah. So the thing that really caught me off guard about him was when he was able to step in, he not only was just kind of thrown that role outright, but Ballard himself came out and said that he not only held his own, but he was good enough in his sample size to actually have Schwenke, who he had signed, he basically bumped him off the roster as an undrafted guy. And I feel like that, I kind of feel like he might have a similar thing happen to him again this year, where we went out and signed Matt Slauson, but if he comes out and shows some kind of improvement, whereas Slauson's probably our veteran leadership, so I could see him making the roster just for that role as well as a backup role. But I feel that Bond might kind of have that same effect where he might plug that backup role, because I feel like he's got a deep strength enough to play the backup guard position also. So I don't know if maybe he slides Slauson out of there, or a different free agent pickup maybe. But with the amount that we added on the offensive line, you're right, it is hard to find. We're going to be cutting some pretty good O-linemen that'll make somebody's roster for sure. The other one I wanted to talk about, and maybe you already mentioned this, I might have tuned in a little late, and I see a lot of people talking about it, but obviously with Frank Reich over here, the obvious connection to the Eagles, and then what's his first name? Kendricks, the linebacker they just released. I don't know if maybe you touched on that, but
very briefly. Yeah, just briefly.
I must have missed it. I've been kind of between him and Rashad Breeland. I've just kind of been holding my breath here. Maybe we could see somebody get grabbed, but I didn't know if you had touched on that already. So
yeah, just briefly. I mean, I talked about that. I'm really interested to see who the guys are. Like, why isn't, I wasn't basically saying that Ballard should be signing these guys for sure, but I'm really curious as to find out why he's not. And we're never going to hear that. Maybe he offers that for some just in anecdotal press conference at one point or another. Like, hey, we just liked who we had or something like that. But I mean, look, you've got Michael Kendricks, who's 28. I think he's going to be 29, or maybe it's the other way around next year. But you've got Breeland is what, 25, 26. I mean, that to me just doesn't make sense for why he's not coming in. Maybe he feels his injury was a bigger deal than it is. Maybe he doesn't feel that he's a perfect scheme fit. Maybe he just didn't, maybe he just didn't feel like his attitude was right. Like he wasn't so much of a leader when they brought him in for their visit. It's hard to tell, but I'm really curious to find. I hope that some, like I said, through some anecdotal part of a press conference, that he gives some sort of a notice as to why he is not grabbing some of this talent that's out there, because the Colts in those areas specifically are pretty talent deficient. And, looking at the cornerback position, I talked about this real briefly at the top of the show, but look, you've got Desir, you've got Quincy Wilson, and you've got Nate Hairston. Those are your starters. Outside of that, you've got a bunch of undrafted guys. You've got Chris Milton and Kenny Moore and DJ White. I mean, you're telling me that you don't have room for Bashaud Breeland with all the money that we've got right now? I won't say that it's rubbing me the wrong way. I just want to know why that is. I want to know why there isn't room for a guy like Bashaud Breeland on this roster when he is clearly a good zone corner. He's clearly a good man corner, and he is clearly more talented than at least half or more of the other cornerbacks. Or I'd say he's probably he would probably be the most talented corner. Aside from, if we get into if we get into the argument about ceilings and whatnot with Wilson and such, I mean, probably, that could be something that we talk about, a little more in depth. But I mean, he's definitely a starting caliber and could win the starting position. I mean, how is that not a guy that piques your interest when there's not another Bashaud Breeland out there. I don't think. Do you? I mean, I'm missing him if there is.
Yeah, I don't think there is at this point. The only thing that I can think of with Breeland that would allow him to sit up there, like you mentioned, is the injury, because he was a hot commodity on opening day of free agency. Like he was pretty coveted, and as soon as the clock started ticking, and lo and behold, he fails his physical, but comes back. Ryan Grant failed his physical failed. We all kind of know what went down there with the Ravens. But that's another story.
Right.
He failed his physical as well and came here, and we signed him decently quickly. So I kind of felt like it would be one of those deals. And the report came out that that he would be able to play and that he had fully healed or something like that. I remember Schefter having a tweet like that, and yet still nobody scooped him up. So I would have to assume that it's along those lines, but I absolutely agree. He would be, I would say the best corner on our roster pretty easily. I like Wilson a lot, but obviously the unproven is there. He could come out and blow us all out of the water and make us look like fools, and we could have, some diamond in the rough. But
sure.
As for right now, I would say Breeland would be easily the best one we have out there. Of any other remaining free agents, I can't even think of many more that I'm super interested in grabbing. Like I could see more, like I said, like the linebacker depth and the cornerback depth, but like you were talking about earlier, the defensive line now seems pretty deep. I actually think we're going to end up having to cut some defensive ends, as crazy as that sounds, because I just don't see how. I think Terrell Basham's going to have quite the jump this year. He played in that 4-3 scheme at Ohio for so long, and he actually excelled in it. I mean, I grade some myself, and I actually had Basham graded out as a second-round talent in a 4-3 scheme myself, coming out last year. So
yeah, I really like
he's going to make
too.
a jump. Yeah, I feel like he's going to make a jump, and Sheard is, like Ballard said, he's pretty much a scheme fit for a 4-3, even though he did well in the 3-4 with us last year. But then you've got Tomoko Ture now that he's sitting behind him, and I've seen some clips of him at OTAs, and I kind of pumped the brakes on that. Right, everybody looks good in shorts type of deal, but he does got some. He does have some twitch that I don't know if I've seen out of very many people on our roster in the past couple of years. So I feel like you talked about Autry earlier. I don't feel like he'll be cut, because I feel like he'll be used on edge and early downs and interior on like passing downs. So I feel like he's a little bit more versatile to play that. And I feel like Tyquan Lewis will be the same, where he'll kind of slide inside. But the only free agents that I could really see us picking up currently, like I said, was the linebacker and Breeland. So
right, absolutely. Hey, I'm going to jump off here so we can get another call in. But thank you, man, for your call. I appreciate it. It was a good conversation.
I appreciate you taking the time, man.
Absolutely. I'm going to get into the linebackers here after I get off with you real quick.
All right.
Thanks for calling.
And
so let's get into the linebackers here, because he made some good points here with the Michael Kendricks situation and what's going on with that. But we talked about it, at the top of the show. Let's look at these. I mean, Matthew Adams is a guy that they drafted. Tyrell Adams, we don't know anything about him. Basically a similar build, a little bit lighter than Matthew Adams. Zaire Franklin, they really like him. They're going to have something for him. Najee Good, not working that Mike role like they had I suggested it, but I mean, I think everybody kind of assumed that's what he would be playing. Sky Moore is a guy that they've been playing at Mike when they've thrown him into rookie mini camp and so on and so forth. They really like his ability to cover. They like a lot of that about him. We don't know anything about William Osai. Looking down, to the rest of the linebackers, I mean, you've got Jeremiah George, Antonio Morrison, and Anthony Walker. Anthony Walker played some of the Mike. Antonio Morrison played a little bit of the Sam. I mean, outside of Darius Leonard, that is basically, that you could make the argument that that would be the starting linebacker rotation. But also at the same point, how can you not find room on that roster and that position group for Michael Kendricks? He was, I think the Eagles were about to pay him about $5.5 million or something like that last year, and they opted out of it. From what I understand, they opted out of it. Basically, they didn't want to pay him that much. And I have a hard time thinking that the Colts would feel like they were overpaying for Michael Kendricks, a guy who was very productive last year, has basically been productive his entire time. I mean, he's had some injury issues and such, but I still think that he's definitely a guy who can be massively productive. And I mean, who isn't he going to get? How is he not going to get a starting role in this? I mean, you're telling me that you wouldn't trade Michael Kendricks for Antonio Morrison? I know it's at the Sam, but what's the difference? He's a linebacker who is a guy who can get on the field. And if you remember, when the Eagles released him, they basically had him playing at the will, but they treated the will like most teams play the Sam. We've been into this a little bit, at least the way I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's the way I understood what they were saying. They had only played him, or that position 30 to 35 snaps a game. They intended on believing that was, how they were going to roll in that defensive scheme. I tend to think that he could play in just about any of those roles for the Colts, especially when you consider the talent that they've got, and I guess rather the lack of talent. Matthew Adams is a guy that I think a lot of people are going to have their eye on going forward. Najee Good is a guy who's 28. He is a bridge guy at the position. Antonio Morrison's on his last legs at any of those positions. If he doesn't come out balls to the wall, I don't think he makes this roster, quite honestly. He is built for the Sam position, though, and nothing else. He is pigeonholed into that Sam position, or he's not on the roster, plain and simple. If somebody beats him out for that Sam position, you can forget about Antonio Morrison in a Colts uniform. Like I said, Sky Moore is going to be a depth guy. Unless he is so excellent in camp, I don't see how he comes in and starts, but he is a guy that they want in those passing situations. I could just about tell you he's a rotational guy for there. But again, how is Michael Kendricks $5.5 million too much to put on this roster? How is Bashaud Breeland, whatever he's going to cost? I think we'd probably realistically guess he's going to be around $7 to $8 million. I think that if I'm not mistaken, the contract that he was going to sign with Carolina was $8 million, and then they failed his physical because of his foot, cut or whatever was going on there. So I think that those are two real talented guys that can find a role in here. And look, if you've got Najee Good in here as a bridge guy, how can you not bring in Michael Kendricks for a year or two as a bridge guy? That line of thinking doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Like I said, maybe we'll find out at some point from Chris Ballard that he just felt that maybe he wasn't a fit. Maybe they didn't feel he's a 3-down player either. I have a lot of problems with that because I think Michael Kendricks is really good. And I think that a lot of Colts fans think that Michael Kendricks is really good. So, I mean, it's a really hard position for me to say that we have too much talent for Michael Kendricks' $5.5 million on this roster. That to me doesn't compute for me. So I'm not sure why that is. I know that he's got a few places that he's been visiting. None of them named Indianapolis Colts, by the way. And apparently he's ready to make his decision within the next couple of days. So, guys, if you want to call in, 574-626-8689. Thank you for the first call tonight. This is the first time I think that we've had a call-in show where we haven't had at least 5 to 8 calls. Kind of surprising a little bit, but I get it. I didn't start the show until after 11 o'clock, so I tried maybe to do it when there wasn't some NBA basketball on, but it looks like we've got, we'll have at least maybe another caller before we wrap it up tonight. But kind of a slow show. So we went for listener call-ins and didn't quite make it that way. So hope that I wasn't rambling too much for you guys throughout the show tonight. The last show that I did was, and let me be crystal clear on this as well. I have never, ever done a Colts cast where I've sat down with a plan. So if you thought that I was a little off base on the last one, I mean, I'm off base on all of them, guys. I have never, ever had a plan for any of these Colts casts other than, some of the call-in shows, because that's just, that's the whole point of the show. So we do have another call. What's going on? You're on the Colts cast. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, how you doing, man? I love your podcast, man. Got through.
Thank you. Thanks for calling, man. Glad you got through it as well.
I listen, man. It's Colts country all year round with me, man. Even when he wasn't doing so great.
Right.
Not so much of a question, but yeah, in that of a conversation, man. The 4-3 defense brings back a lot of bad memories. But funny thing about it, the ironic thing about it was the year that we first had the worst rushing defense of the year. That was the defense that pretty much won the Super Bowl for us back in 2006.
Yeah. Yep.
But I really think when it comes to the defensive end positions, I think it's going to be kind of like this, like the running back. I think it's going to be defensive end by committee. I don't know if any of these guys are going to show up. I'm not going to lose hope in Basham right now. This is these OTAs. We got to see, everybody wants to jump the gun because everybody's excited. But, I hear the energy in the building is really building up. And, it can't be no worse than last year.
Right.
I do agree with you. I believe Al Woods is probably the stud number one in the defensive tackle, knowing that in the past when I'm sorry, I can't help to keep going back through this, I love Tony Dungy, but that Tampa 2 defense killed us up the middle. And this linebacking core that we got is very, very undecided.
Yeah.
We got some free agents, no names that jump out at me, but, pretty much veterans. And plus, that one that played for this past Super Bowl winner.
Mm-hmm.
But
let's talk about that real quick, because that is a real worry about this, right? Is that the reason you think they still that they kept Al Woods versus maybe a Jonathan Hankins, is because they need somebody up the middle that can actually stop the run? And Jonathan Hankins to me was a hell of a run stopper. Don't get me wrong, but it was kind of was it a either or one of we got to keep this guy or this guy, but the other one's going to have to go, because like you said, the Tampa 2 back in the day up the middle was the way to go if you were playing the Colts. And until we got into the playoffs that year, the Colts defense was awful. Run defense.
It was terrible.
Yeah, because
we had a guy who wasn't even 6 foot and was a scud missile, which happened to be our best linebacker.
Yeah,
I mean, besides Gary Brackett, and just like you said, this is a big concern for me, because if you look at a 3-4 defense, remember. Let's go back to Tony Dungy's defense, because I see Coach White going back to this, because this is really his roots.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
It was a solid, great foundation. This is when the Colts were at their apex, when he was an intern with a great coach that had a great foundation, didn't have to speak loud, and it was the break but don't bend is. It gives me gray hairs, man. But I'm sorry, but not to get off the subject. But back to what you were saying, man. I think the great thing is that we do have Al Woods. That now the releasing of Hankins, man, that right there, that was a big, WTF to me too.
Yeah,
because at this point he was 27 years old, which really makes him a seasoned veteran. Not only that, but I think a great 3 would make. You know what? I think he's been in the league long enough. I think that if Robert Mathis can learn to play to go from a 4-3 to a 3-4, I think we should give some guys the benefit of a doubt because I think he was a real smart player, very tough, very big, very strong. And we paid him a lot of that money for a reason and not to just say, well, we don't think that he can play, a 3 technique. So, you know what I mean? I think we're going to see if Ballard is going to have to answer for that. Another guy that we were talking about, the Grover Stewart guy. I didn't see too much of him, but I remember last year when he was drafted, very, very big guy. He said very explosive.
Yeah.
We need a big push up the middle because, like I said, we're going to have probably Simon and Basham on the left side, plus the rookie. I can't pronounce his name, man, but I've seen his
Kamiko Toure
highlights and seen him play. Yeah. It might be one of those short, feisty guys. You know what I mean? And on the right side, Basham, I think, is probably going to have that right side locked down. We can't forget about, sorry, not Basham, but
Jabal Sheard.
Yes, Jabal Sheard. Because remember that, like you said, he played 3 technique in Cleveland. His rookie year had an outstanding rookie year that actually, had made Belichick like, hey, I like this guy. You know what I mean? Because wait a minute, we've seen him in the 3-4 defense last year, and he can't cover. You line him up against a running back or a tight end, he's grass. He's easy pickings.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's a trench guy. The game is run in the trenches. So my main concern is mainly this linebacking core, and I think we're going to have to have a solid. We're going to have to have a solid 2 defensive tackles, man, because I think, look here, man, somebody on these defensive ends are going to have to show up.
Right.
There's too much depth. One thing we do have that we didn't have last year, Chris Ballard has given us depth. He's given us that, that in the offensive line. Hort, I don't know. I don't know. He's hurt. When he's not hurt, he's great. I want to see what this Braden Smith is going to do. I think the whole left side is locked down. Costanzo, I agree with you there. It's a lot of him stands out. You know what? That's kind of like an island too, man. When you're in the left guard and you just see these plays, and then you just see, your left tackle get kind of just overran, and it was just a lot of that. But you know what? I think our offensive line it can't be any worse than what it was last year.
Oh,
I really like the players on there. Nelson was the guy that I really wanted. I think he automatically makes that better. There's going to be a lot of competition. So I think, look here, my thing is like this. I'm going to be optimistic, and one of these guys, some of these guys has got to show up. Right. I think our safety position is locked down.
Well, let me ask you.
I think.
Yeah, you're good.
Sure.
Let me ask you this real quick. As far as from this linebacker group, we're looking for a guys who can, tackle. That are going to be able to stop that sieve up the middle. But how are they? My question with all the talk about this is, there's a lot less thinking to do. There's a lot less responsibilities, a lot fewer responsibilities rather from this linebacking core, from the defensive ends and the guys. They have very specific keys and assignments through this defense, but very simple. So my question is how do they take such a simple defense and turn it into something that can be creative enough to stop that interior run?
Exactly. And you know what? That's another thing I wanted to discuss with you, because you know what I see when you see just reacting, attacking, I see over pursuing.
You're right. A lot of times that is the case.
That's what I see. I see a lot of over pursuing. So my thing is, well, here's another thing. We got a real smart guy in Walker that we drafted last year. I think that's one guy that, Ballard, hey, you drafted him, give him a shot. He's a smart guy. We can't just start thinking that we can just limit these guys to, you know, just a 3 technique or, you know, or 4, you know, 3, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Some of these guys are too light in the behind, man. They are. I really think Hankins was a real big mistake, man. I really do. I really do. I really think letting him go, and not only that, but he was a great tone setter. You know what I mean? So, but you know, I'm not a GM, so, you know, I just think that might be, hey, I hope he was right in pulling the trigger on that one.
Yeah.
So, you know, hopefully that big guy, Grover Stewart, is going to come through, but I really do see, but I mean, like you said, going back to your question, I kind of see a lot of over pursuing. I see a lot of youth in the linebacker core. I kind of see like three-card minded. We don't know what we're going to get. I think something else that you said, I think it's time for last year's draft class to really, really step up. I mean, this is really the time now because now these guys are the rookies. And I don't know. I think the guy that we got from Philadelphia, we're going to see what he gives. You know, we got some veteran presence. You know, like you said, names that don't really jump out at you, but probably names I really never got an opportunity on. You know, I think we got a quarterback back, man. And
makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Hey, now I'm gonna tell you something. This is what I truly believe, and this is just my theory. I think Andrew Luck is going to be fine by the time you know, training camp comes. I think if he keeps doing what he's doing, I think that he's going to have a specific date on when he's going to throw.
I think a lot of people.
I think that's what it is.
I think a lot of people are really itching to see him actually just go through the daily thing of, you know, doing his hands offs, doing some short to intermediate passes, and then, you know, I think that everybody wants to see him uncork one. You know what I mean? So. It's going to be exciting, man. And let me tell you, thank you for calling in. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you calling.
Too, man.
Have a great night, and thanks for calling into the Colts Cast, man. I'm going to try and get one more caller here before we cut it off. So thanks again for calling in.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for talking to me, man.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks, my man.
Yeah, you too.
All right, guys, we got time for one more caller if somebody wants to get that done. So here we go. Sorry about the ring, but we got to deal with what we got to deal with. So thanks for calling, my man. You're on the Colts Cast. What's happening? I guess I shouldn't say my man. I don't know if you're a man.
You got it right. First of all, thanks for doing this. I wish I had known this a little bit sooner, so I would have tuned in at the beginning. I just happened to catch it. When people watch on the Xbox, even though I'm set up for notifications, you get no warning. So just as a heads up, I don't know if a lot of YouTubers realize that if you're on the Xbox, you're kind of hosed about you can't leave comments, you can't do much on there but watch. But aside from that, getting on the Colts football, what I don't understand and what I keep hearing, everybody seems to be real comfortable with our safeties and our corners. And what I don't understand is why, because they're injury prone. They've got not much experience. I don't think they proved all that much when they played. Sure, our free safety had some interceptions, but, you know, he made it through, I think, 7 games and he was out. And our other safeties are always hurt. And so I guess I'm really confused in that corner. I don't see us as really having any experience. They're counting on the guy from the second round last year, but he was hurt most of last season too. So why are we so confident about our corners when we don't really have anybody back there with any real experience?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm completely on board with you on this. Now, the safety situation, I'm a little more at ease because I think that Matthias Farley really proved that he could be a starter last year. Can he be Can he be a top end starter? I guess that's probably still, you know, he's still a young guy though too. So that's still, I think, in the cards for him to work out throughout this preseason. I think Malik Hooker, everybody has to be excited about his upside, his ceiling. But I think that Geathers is a little bit more of a question mark than I think people are willing to offer, because he's another guy who was out for a while, and people were like, oh, he was a good coverage guy, which he was a pretty good coverage guy. He was a more than physical guy from the safety position, but he was out for a while. He came back last year, played a little bit, did a pretty nice job last season. Didn't get the wholesale snaps that most probably expected he was going to do. So I'm anxious to see how he kind of, gears back up this year. But outside of that, I mean, I have no confidence whatsoever in TJ Green, and I don't think very many people do.
No, I think he's barely on the team. I don't expect him to be on the team when the season starts if he finds anybody from the undrafted guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with that too. Now, cornerback is a completely other conversation as far as I'm concerned. We've got 3 starters, but there's plenty of room for guys to hop in there. We were talking a little bit earlier about Bashaud Breeland. There's no reason that he wouldn't be a starter on this roster. But so many people want to say, well, who's he going to, people think that he's like a 35-year-old veteran that is going to come in and take snaps from a young guy. He's 26, I think. I hate saying that without knowing for sure. I am going to look up his year, but I think he's 25 or 26. And I just think that to have a guy like Bashaud Breeland in that defensive room, in that cornerback room, it could pay massive dividends. Let's see, what is he? He's 26. Okay. So you're telling me that you're worried about, and I don't mean you, but I mean, fans out there are too worried about a 26-year-old guy coming in and stealing snaps from Pierre Desir, who's also 26, 27, from Quincy Wilson, who's a rookie, ultimately, again this year because he didn't get much playing time last year. I mean, Quincy Wilson's going to be a hell of a corner, in my opinion. But on the other hand,
we don't know. I mean,
right?
By theory, that's only theory. We have no facts to back that up.
Right. I'm saying I'm going off of his the way that he was
college career.
Yes. Well, that and how he played when he was healthy last year. He was a guy who mixed it up quite a bit. He was solid in man, but I think that he might have a little struggles in this zone. That's kind of where I'm a little bit worried about. How does he, because they're wanting the fast, twitchy guys to be able to come up, make plays on the ball, disrupt the ball, make hard hits, unlodge the ball and stuff like that. I think that Quincy can do that. I'm not saying that I don't think he can. I have faith that he can do that from what I've seen from him while, trying to get a gauge on what he did in college and last year even. But we don't know that for sure. You make a good point about that. That's ultimately theory for right now.
He's the guy that's going to be guarding Odell Beckham this year.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, right? Do the Colts have a shutdown corner? I don't think so.
I don't even know that we have. We have several number 2 corners.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a starting corner. I mean, like a number 1 corner on the roster. I don't think we're anywhere close to that.
Yeah, I really did when we were going through a lot of through the college tape of Quincy Wilson. I was very high on him. There's a lot of guys that I respect that did a really good analysis on him as well, and they saw some stuff even that I didn't. But I think that the proof is in the play, and he didn't get enough play last year to prove it for a season that he's a guy who can be either a starter or be a great number 2. And Pierre Desir, while I really like Pierre Desir, I think he's a good guy. He was another guy who came through, was like a draft Nick favorite. He was a draft Twitter favorite and didn't get a lot of love throughout the early parts of his career. He came in last year and unseated ultimately Vontae Davis because Vontae was slow, couldn't guard past 10 yards, and just didn't have the physicality I don't think that they really wanted from that position. But
right,
man, there is so much room for Bashaud Breeland to come in here. People are too worried about who he's going to unseat as a starter, and they should be more worried about how can we build like legitimate depth at the position, especially when a guy is 26 years old coming in, and people are worried about him as if he's like I said, a 30-some-year-old veteran who's going to take snaps from a young guy.
That's not my worry. I just still look at these guys as these should be depth guys. These shouldn't be our frontline starters. It's like we're missing 2 starters. They're injured, and this is who we're going with.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's what worries me. I feel the same way about the safeties, is that those guys can't stay healthy. That's sure Hooker only played one season, but he missed most of his first season. So did Wilson. He missed most of his first season. So not only are these guys not experienced, but they haven't shown us that they can stay healthy even for one season. So what happens when any of these guys, let's say we can patchwork together something, but between the linebackers not being strong and then the rest of the, I mean, I don't know what's strong on our team at this point in our defense, but doesn't look improved that much over last year, to be honest.
Absolutely. And if you look at the guys if you look at the Colts recent, interviews, whatever you want to call it, guys they've had in for meetings, if they could, I mean, if the Colts signed Trey Boston, Bashaud Breeland, and Michael Kendricks, I mean, are you telling me that the Colts defense isn't significantly improved? Yeah. I would think so.
I thought I saw tonight and it was a different podcast from a different company, but I thought they said that Michael had already eliminated the Colts. He was down to 3 teams.
I don't know if the Colts were even in on him, to be honest. They were. It was the Vikings and a couple others, and I really am struggling to remember who I saw in that tweet.
The Browns, the Vikings, and I can't think of the third one, but those were the two main ones they thought they were.
None of them were the Colts. That's what. But I mean, those 3 guys. If the Colts could sign those 3 guys, I mean, the Colts defense would have been significantly improved, in my opinion. Here's the thing.
Well, most people feel like if they had signed any of the guys that were available for the defense, we didn't need to go out and wholesale change the whole team. But just, one strong guy at each position group, 3 guys maybe, that we could assign that were proven at least average starters. If we could have gotten 3 average starters so that we knew we had something we could fall back on, and then hope that the young guys step up, and then those guys become the depth.
Right.
But right now, I'd take any of those kinds of guys to start in a heartbeat.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know. I just haven't heard a lot of people talk about the corners and the safeties. You go onto the Colts message board, nobody seems to be concerned. That's one area they don't complain and whine about. So it's just kind of strange, and everybody complains about linebackers. That's kind of easy. They still complain about the offensive line. I think that's much improved. My concerns are wide receivers, and the corners have been the biggest worries for me.
Yeah, and when you get back to the safety position, let's say the Colts were to sign Trey Boston, then they get rid of.
Then I would feel better, because then we get rid of the guy from a couple of years ago, TJ.
Right. You get rid of Green,
and then we got a good room. I think you're right.
Yep.
And Farley, I think the thing about Farley, I loved him last year. He was my favorite player all throughout the year. In fact, I used to call for him to play more, and lots to say, "Oh, what are you talking about? He's no good." And then he proved himself on the field.
Absolutely.
But I think he was also the smartest kid in the dumb class, because he was the one guy that looked kind of good out there on most games. That and the rest of the guys look so bad that made him look that much better.
Yeah, and that's a valid point. But like we said, you bring in Trey Boston, you get rid of TJ Green. Bring in Breeland, and you can get rid of just whoever you want to get rid of, because there's 4 or 5 no-names on this Colts roster that aren't going to be starters or legitimate, in my opinion, backups. There's a couple guys who might be, but we don't know that. And then obviously Kendricks isn't an option. It doesn't appear, but I just don't see. I mean, look, Ballard has done pretty well, but he's had some weird moves, or lack of moves, I guess we could say. He hasn't, he pulled the trigger on releasing Jonathan Hankins. Some people saw that as a smart move. I wasn't one of them. His haste in signing some of the most talented guys that are available out there, that are still very much in this age range that he targets. And when the Colts, I mean, look, there's a very smart suggestion that you don't, just because you have money doesn't mean you should go out and spend it. But the Colts have a lot of money, and they haven't spent hardly any of it. And it's not about the money. It's just about, look, you've got it, and you've got basically a need. If you really want to improve the competition, you bring in Trey Boston and you get rid of TJ Green. Because I just don't see how TJ Green makes anybody in this safety core better. I don't see how he makes.
He was there by default. He was there because there was no other warm body to put there.
Right. Absolutely. And I don't see how he makes anybody in the offensive line better, or how he makes a tight end better when he's covering him, because he's awful in coverage.
Yeah, he's awful in everything. The guy was. I remember yelling about it when he was drafted. I was really unhappy, and a lot of people were high on it. And the next year, I really wanted the guy that they drafted into, or the year before. I mean, the guy they drafted at Atlanta that was the rookie last year that did so well. He played in the Super Bowl. The rookie safety. I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking out. I apologize. I should have had the name at my tip. Anyway, but I still thought we needed more safety help because I didn't want to rely on the guys that we had. And that year he was picked one pick before us by Atlanta, and they got him. But I used to get abused on the message board too because we did our Colts mock draft. I was the Colts, and that's who I picked, and everybody jumped down my throat and said it was the worst decision ever. And and of course he turned out to be like the best rookie defensive player I thought last year. But
I know who you're talking about. My brain's not working either. Right now.
I know. That's okay. My brain's fried too. But are you going to do this on a regularly at this time, or do you have a certain day you're going to do this regularly? Because
this is a little bit later than I typically do, but trying to find a more inclusive way to get the fans involved as much as possible, so that we can have these conversations and such. And I think that I needed to start doing them more. I think we were doing them for about once every couple weeks there for a while, and then we've kind of kicked back just a little bit because there's just a lack of news and everything else. But the conversation tonight has been great. The conversations tonight have been great. We'll continue to do these, and definitely we'll start kicking them up here over the dead period as well. So, hey, man, I really appreciate you calling in.
Just the last thing I wanted to say is,
absolutely,
whatever your lighting situation is tonight's the best it's looked. As far as the way the podcast looks.
Thank you.
So, and from now on, put the number on the screen the whole time you're doing this. You'll get way more calls.
Yeah.
You got to have the number on the screen the whole time. I know it sounds simple, but put a piece of paper where you can see it in the camera shot with the number on it, and people will call in. It took me forever. I finally found it online to get the number to even call in.
Oh, well, every time I do these, I'll put a post up on Stampede Blue as well. For some reason, I can't get the toolbox to work on this, so that's probably what's kept me from doing it.
A little piece of cardboard folded on your table in eyesight, right behind your left shoulder, left elbow. If you put it there on a little piece of cardboard, people will call in. Thanks a lot. Great show.
Absolutely. Thank you, my man. I appreciate you calling in.
All
right. Guys, thank you very much for a really good show tonight. Enjoyed it. Forced me to talk. Since that's what I do here on these shows in general for the first 30 minutes or so, 20, 25 minutes, whatever it was. But I appreciate you guys calling. We had some good conversation tonight. We will continue to do these, and we'll probably, like we just mentioned a few moments ago, amp these up a little bit in the dead period because there just isn't a lot of news with the Colts. The conversations are great. It's a lot of fun to talk. Differing opinions, same opinions, it just doesn't matter. It's a lot of fun for us to get into those. So thank you guys all for watching. It was, like I said, it was a great show. Thank you for those who called in. Make sure you guys are getting to iTunes or Apple Podcasts and supporting the podcast. We really appreciate it. It's been, a good hour and a half here, and we only planned on doing an hour. So I appreciate all of you guys thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll continue to do these, and guys, we'll talk to you next time right here on the Colts Cast.